So that little scene that you saw it's what I look at when I'm sitting at the computer. It's my view. Tomorrow's Remembrance Day, November the 11th, and I thought I'd share an article with you folks on one of my favorite websites. I've been frequenting henrymakow.com for almost 9 years now. I'm not one to recommend a lot of places for people to go to find information, whether it's fitness, health, alternative news sources, conspiracy, what have you. But I recommend henrymakow.com. Before I read the article that he posted today, and it's an article that he posts at this point in time every year, I want to say there's no disrespect meant to anyone that has ever served in the armed forces of any country. My grandfather was a vet. My father was a World War II vet, as were several of my uncles. I've known people that did tours in Vietnam. I've known people that were in the Canadian military, that were stationed in Cyprus, that were part of the UN force that went to Bosnia in the 90s. I've had friends that were in the military that have done current tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, so forth. I have American friends that also have served in armed forces, different branches. So again, no disrespect is meant to any of you folks when I read this or how I feel about this, because I am not one of those individuals that celebrates Remembrance Day. So this yearly article by Makow is called Veterans Day Requires a Rethink. Veterans Day Requires a Rethink. I'll just scroll down a little bit. When the United States and England loaned Mexico money in 1903, using its customs revenue as collateral, the Illuminati banker Jacob Schiff cabled his English counterpart, Ernest Cassel, the following: If they don't pay, who will collect the customs? Cassel then replied, "Your Marines and ours." This is taken from the book The Life of Otto Kahn on page 22. The article goes on to state, Marine General Smedley Butler, birth and death date 1881 to 1940, confirmed that he was a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and the bankers. In his 1935 book, War is a Racket, he wrote, "I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil companies in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I have helped in the raping of a half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers from 1909 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American Sugar Interest in 1916, and in China, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested." Again, this is from his 1935 book, War is a Racket. We flash forward to 2011, or as I like to say, 2011, when NATO fomented and led a revolution in Libya. And at that point in time, Libya was one of only 4 companies that did not have a Rothschild Center bank. The others are Libya, Iran, North Korea, and I'm missing one. But Libya obviously now has a central bank. Even with the economic and social turmoil that that country is in, they have a Rothschild-inspired central bank. It goes on to say that central bankers are behind all wars. All wars are profited by the Illuminati bankers to collect or incur debt. They plunder and they profit. And they advance their program for a world government. I apologize if I stop here because I'm having some serious internet issues and my screen is lagging as I try to scroll through it. In most cases, we are told that they are fighting to preserve freedom, when the opposite is actually the case. The article goes on to say, so how should we regard our veterans? Certainly, a few are heroes, but usually in a bogus case when the facts pertaining to their individual situations have been trumped up, so to speak, so that the media can have at it. I think we have to regard them as dupes and mercenaries. We have all been duped for a very long time. That gives Veterans Day a tinge of cynicism and pathos. On November the 2nd, we were mostly commemorating World War II. While we lost fathers and sons, Allied and Nazi central bankers were huddled together in Basel at the Bank of International Settlements, mainly financing Nazis. So if you're not aware of the Bank of International Settlements, it's also called the BIZ. It is still in play today. The BIZ handed over the Nazis the national treasures of Czechoslovakia, Holland, and Belgium to ensure that the war could go on. The gold from those countries was worth $378 million at the time and was the basis of loans to the Nazis, and it was never repaid. The BIS accepted and stored Nazi plunder. I'm sure you've heard about that. Arts, diamonds, precious metals. You know, they're financing someone to go into another country and wage war, and the stuff that they're stealing is how they're paying their loan back. It's a great system. The U.S. Federal Reserve, the banks of England, France, Italy, Japan, and the Reichsbanks were all members of BIS. The Nazi Reichsbank had the most had the most seats, but the BIS president was Rockefeller factum Thomas H. McKintrick. Birth and death dates 1889 to 1970. Interesting little side note here. That man has no Wikipedia entry. I guess he doesn't exist. Changing the world means having a world war. So I'm going to quote some stuff here. Questioned by a U.S. Treasury Department official in March of 1945, McKintrick said that the war had been a charade all along, with Germany taking the fall. Asked why the BIS worked with the Nazis, he replied, "In the complicated German financial setup, certain men who have had their central banker's point of view are in a very strategic position and can influence the conduct of the German government." He then spelled it out, albeit in a euphemism. The war's purpose was to reposition Germany for the New World Order bankers. McKittrick went on to say that there were a little group of financiers who had felt from the beginning that Germany would lose the war, that after defeat they might emerge to shape Germany's destiny, that they would maintain their contacts and trust with other important banking elements so that they would be in a stronger position in the post-war world to negotiate loans for the reconstruction of Germany. This quotation is from Charles Hingham's mind-blowing book, Trading with the Enemy, printed in 1983, and that was quoted on page 37. A who's who of corporations controlled by these bankers had factories in occupied Europe that underpinned the Nazi war effort and profited handsomely. Some of you may know some of the facts I'm going to throw at you. I was aware of some of them. Ford, General Motors, Standard Oil, and ITT provided the Nazis with essential trucks, airplane engines, material, and technology, often giving the Nazis preference during shortages. In the telling examples, the Allies bombed the shit out of a ball bearing plant in Germany, only to have the stock replaced by a factory in Pennsylvania shipped via Sweden. Hyam refers to these bankers as the fraternity. Excuse me, I need to drink, my mouth's getting a little dry. But they are actually members of the Illuminati. An earlier set of bankers masterminded World War I, and it's a hyperlink on this article and how they kept it going. It goes on to say, I think you get the picture, all wars are really engaged by Luciferian central bankers against humanity, and at this point they put i.e. the Goyim, of if you're not of Jewish persuasion, you're a Goyim. In 1916, almost 1.2 million British, French, and German soldiers died or were maimed in the Battle of Somme. One battle, 1.2 million. And it also points out that all those young people that died, they were the cream of that generation from all of those countries. So it goes without saying that when you're participating in a war, you're actually an accomplice in our own destruction. The military is actually catching on, and if you're paying attention to alternative media, you know that that is the point, that soldiers, commanders, they are catching on to what's going on. As this recent poll states, only 34% of U.S. veterans of the post-9/11 military believe that Iraq and Afghanistan wars were worth fighting. U.S. soldiers now generally say they're fighting for their buddies, not their country. The article goes on to conclude, we cannot honor veterans without recognizing that, like us, they have been duped. Otherwise, we perpetuate the sinister power which holds us all prisoner. Ultimately, the New World Order is about replacing the rule of God with the rule of Lucifer. That's why God has become a dirty word. War is the principal means by which Lucifer's disciples, the capitalists, the Satanists, central bankers, want to change the world. They have erected a police state behind a facade of freedom, and if you're ignorant to that fact, then you really, really have been dumbed down. Turn off your TV. We don't know this because our leaders in government, education, media are unwitting or unwittingly part and parcel part of the problem. Treason to God and country is a prerequisite for success in many fields of business and politics. If honoring veterans means perpetuating a suicidal cycle of endless wars, we must stop. Better to honor the dead by abolishing wars. If we can do this by nationalizing private central banks and making the bankers answer for their crimes, I actually think it goes a lot beyond that, but that would be a start. So, I don't know if you know who Ken Adachi is. He has a website. It was one of the first alternative news websites out there. And it is called educateyourself.org. So this comment is from Ken at educateyourself.org. In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, a certain percentage of young American men from blue-collar families would typically join some branch of the U.S. military to gain employment, free medical, dental care, free meals, housing, technical training, perhaps some college, and above all, have an adventure to see the world. Now, no one of this decade or of those decades had any inkling that the Pentagon was really about and just how rotten the scoundrels and liars of Washington, D.C., who connive with their pals in banking and the military-industrial complex to create the pretext and excuses to wage war against innocent peoples in faraway lands. Sound vaguely familiar? It's a bit of a cycle they've been doing the whole time. They generate obscene amounts of profit for themselves, and it's all at the taxpayers' expense. Following the treachery leveled against U.S. servicemen in the first Gulf War, 1991, by its own government, in which hundreds of thousands of men and women were subjected to vaccinations that caused the intentionally introduced lab-created Gulf War syndrome or illness, you would think that far more young people would think twice about joining a Pentagon killing machine that had all of the earmarks of a satanic stewardship. After the traitors in our military and government, working with the Mossad, orchestrated the events of 9/11, they now send U.S. military personnel into Iraq and Afghanistan to engage in such depraved levels of barbarity, cruelty, and murderous savagery. And you'll notice most of that is against civilians. That, for the first time in history of the United States, we have scores and scores of returning military people, men and women, committed suicide because they can no longer take the mental torment that their conscience has forced upon them for their conduct in the wars in the Middle East and abroad. The only way that you can stop this process is to stop cooperating with it, and that means to stop enlisting in the military. In 2005, all the signs were in place for the calling of a draft, but ultimately they decided not to follow through because of the war in Iraq. And at that point in time, if you remember, public opinion was really, really negative against the war in Iraq. So Ken's comment goes on to, my page is frozen. Ken's comment goes on to say they all started sucking up recruits from Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Philippines to fill American military boots and make up the shortfall with promises of fast-tracking of U.S. citizenship and other financial perks and incentives at taxpayers' expense, of course. In earlier decades, you could believe the party line that we were the good guys of the world, and our mission was to maintain the peace and provide stability, and all that flag-waving crap that they throw at naive, inexperienced, and trusting minds. But today, that is not any excuse. And I'm really sick of listening to people talk about how great, we were, and let's get back on track. It's not a you. It's not a me thing. It's an us. It's the whole fucking planet. So I'm going to end this off with a little bit of information about November the 11th. So this goes on to talk about some esoteric symbols, and if you're into symbolism, you'll understand what that means. Most military monuments are cenotaphs. A cenotaph is basically an obelisk, and that is a phallic shaft of Baal for sex worship. That's what it actually signifies. Think Washington Monument. The cenotaph in front of the old City Hall in Toronto, which I used to live, has a wreath penetrating by a wheat sheaf or a laurel. It's another sex worship symbol in symbolism from the Illuminati. It's very similar to the cross and the crown. Granite, particularly black granite, is a symbol of Lucifer. This explains why it is frequently found at war memorials, including the front lawns at Queen's Park in Toronto. Queen's Park is the provincial legislation. It's the area where the provincial legislation is held in Ontario. The 11 numerology of November 11th at 11 a.m. 11-11-11 is a symbol for a world-changing destructive event. A triple number has maximum potency in the effect of the occult. The poppy itself is a symbol of opiates, a path to the astral plane, which is a demonic realm. The poppy also symbolizes Morpheus, the pagan god of sleep. And the war in Afghanistan, as you know, is all about poppies. Because up until the United States invaded, the Taliban was running the show over there, and opium and drug production was almost nil. Within 6 months of the bombing campaign happening, it was up to about 90% of the world's opium was coming out of Afghanistan. Once again, thank you, U.S. military. In Flanders Fields, where poppies grow, between the crosses row and row. I'm sure you've all heard that. That was written by John McCrae out of Guelph. And that was literally pulled out of the garbage and printed in the newspaper as a form of propaganda. And you have to keep in mind that Remembrance Day is not a memorial day for the Illuminati. It is the day for them to celebrate Lucifer. It's a death worship day. And it's about them paying homage to all the people that have died so that they can, strive towards getting that new world order. So there you have it. That is a rather long read. I hope I didn't bore anybody and put you to sleep. And that is one of the reasons why I do not have anything to do with Remembrance Day. I don't wear a poppy. I don't celebrate it. I have no problem talking to a service member and letting them know that I appreciate what they've done, they themselves, whatever reason why they joined the military, that is their prerogative. But the fact that they went, I appreciate that. You didn't fight for my freedoms. I'm not one of those people that, if they hadn't gotten fight for our freedoms, what would we be doing today? No, it's all a crock of shit. Research your world history, and it's not the drivel that you're going to find in history books. You've got to dig deep. You've got to get out there. You've got to apply critical thought. The world is so much more than what we think we know. Anyways, take care of one another, and remember, you got to live hard and die free.